The morning mud was still caked on my boots. Everyone else's shoes cost more than my first tractor, and they glistened under the chandeliers like wet river stones. 200 guests, white orchids that I cut myself at 4 a.m., and my own father raised a glass of champagne, smiled at the crowd, and called me just a farmer. He thought that was the ending. He had no idea who would walk into his boardroom next week, and what she would offer. My name is Emma Harrison. I am 34 years old, and I make a living growing food. In the cold greenhouse at 4 a.m., I had stood with a knife in my hand, cutting the last white orchids for my brother's wedding. My breath was steaming, the heaters ticking. I cut each stem at an angle, wrapped them in wet cloth, and loaded 40 boxes into the refrigerated truck myself, because I don't ask my crew to sacrifice sleep for family obligations. Every flower in that ballroom came from my soil. So did the heirloom tomatoes in the caprese, the baby greens under the seared scallops, the herbs in the sauce nobody could name. I paid for all of it. $40,000 wired quietly through the caterer 3 weeks earlier, on the strict condition that nobody ever learned where it came from. Daniel is my little brother, and Daniel was getting married, and I wanted the day to be beautiful more than I wanted the credit. That is not humility. I want to be honest with you because this whole story turns on it. I had learned a long time ago that in my family being seen and being safe were two different things. And I had chosen safe, so I made the wedding perfect, and I made myself invisible. And I stood at the back in muddy boots, and let 200 strangers assume I was staff. The caterer, a kind woman named Dolores, caught my eye once from across the room and gave me a small nod, the only person alive who knew. I nodded back. Then I picked a fallen orchid petal off the floor and put it in my pocket. And I told myself that was enough, that the work would speak for itself someday. I really believed that by midnight I would stop believing it, and I would never believe it again. To understand my father, you'd have to see the building with his name on it. Harrison Provisions, a food processing and distribution company he founded before I was born. 40 years of packaged sauces and private label groceries, and a downtown office with his portrait in the lobby. My sister Vanessa runs it beside him now, Coco. And between them, they have decided what the word Harrison means. It means glass towers. It means the right watch. It means a table at the restaurant, where the entree costs more than a farm worker earns in a day. My mother Ruth never fit that definition, and she never tried to. She grew up on land north of the city, 60 acres of good soil her own father left her. And when she married into money, she kept the deed in her own name like a woman keeping a door unlocked. She used to take me out there on Sundays. She'd press seeds into my palm and say the dirt didn't care what your last name was, only whether you showed up. She died when I was 19. The cancer took 8 months. At the end, she pulled me close in that hospital bed, her hand light as a leaf, and she gave me the land. 60 acres and a warning. Don't ever let anyone price you by the size of their wallet, she said. My father inherited nothing from her but a widower's black suit. Vanessa inherited her ambition and pointed it in the opposite direction, and I inherited the dirt. And the name Harrison that had come down her side of the family, not his. That last part matters more than anyone in that ballroom understood. They thought the name belonged to the tower. It belonged to the soil first. Vanessa found me near the coat check before the ceremony, the way a hawk finds a mouse. She was radiant in slate gray silk, 40 years old, and sharpened to a point. And she looked me over from my boots to my braid, with the patience of a woman appraising damaged goods. "Oh, Emma," she said, reaching out to straighten my collar for me as if I were a child sent to school unwashed. "You came in those." Her fingers stopped at my hand and lifted it, turning it over in the light so the two women beside her could see. My palms are a farmer's palms, calloused at the base of every finger, a healed split across the right thumb, ground in soil under 2 nails no brush ever fully reaches. She held my hand up like evidence. "You can wash the dirt off your hands, Emma," she said, smiling so the others would think it was affection. "But everyone can still smell the barn." The women laughed, the small laugh that women learn to give powerful women. I took my hand back slowly, and I didn't wipe it on my dress, though every nerve wanted to. I had spent 15 years earning those calluses. I was not going to be ashamed of them at my own brother's wedding. But something cold moved through me anyway, because I understood then that no version of me would ever be clean enough for her. Not if I bathed in bleach. Not if I sold the farm and bought silk. The dirt she smelled wasn't on my skin. It was in her idea of me, and there was no washing that out. "Save me a seat," I said, and walked to the very back row, where I could watch my brother get married without anyone watching me. The ceremony was lovely. Daniel cried when Chloe walked down the aisle, and I cried too, quietly from the back where nobody keeps score. Then came the reception, and the dinner and the seat. They'd put me at table 11 near the kitchen doors, between an aunt who forgot my name twice, and a business associate of my father's who did not. He was a genial man, a little drunk, and he asked me the question people ask at weddings. "And what do you do, Emma?" I opened my mouth. My father, 2 seats down, answered before I could. "Emma plays in the dirt," he said, warm and dismissive all at once. "The way you describe a hobby that got out of hand. Grows vegetables, sells them at those little markets. We keep hoping she'll get tired of it." The associate chuckled and turned back to his wine. And I sat there with the answer in my mouth. I could have said, "I supply 4 regional grocery chains." I could have said, "I employ 31 people year-round and 90 in season." I could have said my greens were on the plate he was eating from, at that exact moment. Instead, I smiled and reached for my water, and I let it go, because I had decided long ago that a person who has to announce her worth at a dinner table has already lost the argument. That was the story I told myself anyway. The truth is, I was afraid that if I laid it all out and they finally looked impressed, the respect would be for the numbers, not for me, and I would rather have their contempt than their conditional applause. So I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet, and my father took my quiet as agreement and stood up to give his toast. He tapped his glass with a dessert fork, and the room went soft and attentive, the way rooms do for wealthy men. He toasted Daniel and Chloe. He toasted the future. He thanked everyone for coming to a celebration worthy of the Harrison name, and he let his eyes travel the room, the orchids, the crystal, the 8-piece band, and I watched him decide to be clever. You know, he said family means everything to me. All of us together from the boardroom too. He found me at table 11 and lifted his glass an inch in my direction. "Well, to the farm." A ripple of chuckles. He was enjoying it now. "My youngest daughter grows vegetables, and bless her, she works hard at it. But I look around at all this," he said, sweeping the glass across the ballroom I had paid for, "and I have to ask, when will a farmer ever afford a wedding like this?" The room laughed. 200 people. The band leader, the aunt beside me, all of them laughing at the girl in the muddy boots while a camera on a tripod near the cake panned slowly across my face. Every orchid he was gesturing at, I had cut. Every plate had come out of my ground. I had wired $40,000 into this exact evening so my brother would have the day he deserved, and my father stood in the middle of it and asked the room when a farmer could ever afford it. I set down my fork. I did not stand up. I did not correct him. I looked at Daniel, who had gone still at the head table, and I gave my brother the smallest shake of my head. Not now, not today, but something in me that had been bending for 15 years finally, quietly, broke. Daniel found me 20 minutes later by the kitchen doors, where I'd gone to check that the dessert plating was going all right. An old habit I couldn't switch off even at my own humiliation. He looked wrecked. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he said. I didn't know he was going to. I should have said something. I should have stood up. He was 29 and gentle, and he had spent his whole life being the peace between our father and everyone else, and I could see the guilt eating him. "It's your wedding day," I told him. "You don't spend it fighting Dad on my behalf." "But the flowers," he said quietly, and my stomach dropped because I hadn't told him. He saw my face. Chloe recognized the orchids. She said, "Only one grower around here does the ruffled white ones." And then the caterer let something slip. "And Emma, did you pay for all this?" I could have lied. I looked at my brother, at the boy who used to follow me out to Mom's land and fall asleep in the truck bed, and I couldn't. "Don't," I said. "Don't tell them. Promise me. If they know, it changes what tonight was. And I don't want it to change." He stared at me. "You let him say that in front of everyone, when you—" "I let him say it," I said. "Because being right in front of a crowd isn't the same as being loved." And I stopped confusing the two. A long time ago. He didn't understand it, not fully. But he nodded because it was his wedding and I asked him to. He hugged me hard, smelling of cologne and cake, and went back to his bride. And I got my coat, and I found my truck in a lot full of German cars, and I started the long drive home. It's 90 minutes from the city to the farm, mostly dark highway, and then a county road with no lights. I drove it with the radio off. Somewhere around the halfway mark past the last gas station, I let myself feel it. For 15 years, I had told myself a story, and the story went like this. If I just worked hard enough, grew good enough, built something solid enough, then one day the work would speak so loudly that my father would have to hear it, and he'd look at me the way he looked at Vanessa, and I would finally belong. I had planted that hope like a seed, and watered it every season. That night on the county road, I finally understood it was never going to grow. He didn't fail to see my worth. He saw it fine. He'd eaten it off a plate that evening. He just didn't count it because it came out of the ground instead of a spreadsheet. And no harvest was ever going to change the arithmetic in his head. You can't earn your way out of someone's contempt when the contempt is the whole point. I pulled into my own gravel drive a little after midnight. The farmhouse was dark. The fields stretched out silver under a half moon. 60 acres my mother pressed into my hand while she was dying. And I sat in the truck and looked at them and let the hope die all the way. Then, my phone lit up on the passenger seat, a number I half recognized, an office line. Calling at midnight. My father, I thought, and my chest went tight in a way I hated. Calling to apologize, or to twist the knife. I almost let it ring out, then I answered. It wasn't my father. Emma, it's Sophia. I know it's late. Sophia Reyes runs operations at the farm. 38. Unflappable. The person who keeps the whole machine running when I'm off cutting orchids for ungrateful families. She never calls at midnight. My tiredness dropped away. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Something's right, maybe. I got a call end of day, meant to reach you sooner, but I figured you were at the wedding. She took a breath. Bell and Crane Foods wants to talk. Not a trial order, Emma. The whole thing. A multi-year regional supply contract. Produce and specialty greens exclusive. Their head of sourcing called me directly. I sat up straight in the dark cab. Bell and Crane is not a farmer's market operation. They are a national food company. The kind whose products sit on shelves in every state. The kind that could take everything my farm grows and ask for more. A contract like that doesn't just grow a business, it changes what the business is. When do they want to meet? I asked. Next week. And Emma, she hesitated, which Sophia never does. They said the deal has moving parts. There's a partner company involved on the packaging and distribution side, and the sourcing lead was coy about who. Big name. Apparently they want everyone in one room to sign the whole structure at once. I stared out at my silver fields. A week ago this call would have been the best news of my year. Now something cold and precise was moving in my chest. A farmer's instinct for weather she can't yet see. Set the meeting, I said. I'll be there. I hung up and sat in the truck a long time. I told myself the unease was just the late hour. It wasn't. 2 days later I drove back to the city, this time in clean clothes and a truck that smelled of nothing but coffee, and I met Marcus Bell. He is the CEO of Bell & Crane in his mid-50s, silver at the temples, with the plain manner of a man too successful to need to perform it. His office had a view of the whole valley. He shook my hand, and I noticed did not flinch at the calluses. He looked at them for a second actually, and something like respect crossed his face. So you're the one, he said. I've been eating your tomatoes for 3 years without knowing your name. We sat and he laid it out straight, which I appreciated. Bell & Crane was expanding a premium fresh line, and they needed a supplier who could hit organic certification, deliver at volume, and do it from within the region, so the truck stayed short. He had spent 8 months looking. There are exactly 2 operations in this corridor that can meet the spec, he said. One of them told me last month they're at capacity and won't expand. That leaves you. He slid a folder across the desk. I'll be honest, Miss Harrison, I don't have a second option. If we do a premium regional line, we do it with Harrison Farms or we don't do it here at all. I kept my face even the way I keep it when a buyer thinks he's holding all the cards, but inside something had shifted quietly and completely. For 15 years I'd been the one without leverage. The one who took what the market offered and said thank you. Now a national company was telling me in a corner office that the whole plan turned on a name, my name. I opened the folder, and that's when I saw the other party listed on the distribution side. There on the second page, under distribution and co-packing partner, printed in the same plain font as everything else, was a name I had grown up under. Harrison Provisions, my father's company, my sister's company. Bell and Crane wasn't just buying my produce. They were building a supply chain, and they intended to run it through my father's plant for packaging and distribution. And neither end of that chain knew the other end was me. I must have gone still, because Marcus Bell tilted his head. You know them. I know of them, I said carefully. Good outfit, old company, but they've had a rough couple of years from what I hear. He said it neutrally, but I heard the thing underneath. Later I'd learned the whole picture, but even then I understood the shape of it. Harrison Provisions was in trouble. 40 years old and slipping, undercut by cheaper competitors, carrying too much debt. And this Bell and Crane contract wasn't a nice new account for my father. It was a lifeline. Without the volume this deal would pump through his plant, the company my father built, the company that let him stand in a ballroom and pity me, might not survive the year. And the whole thing depended on a supplier only I could provide. I closed the folder. My hands were steady inside. I was anything but. For 15 years I had kept my two lives in separate fields. The farm on one side, the family on the other, and I had worked very hard to make sure they never touched. Now Marcus Bell had drawn a line straight between them in ink, and asked me to sign it. I drove home that night with the folder on the passenger seat like a live thing. And I thought about my mother. She'd been gone 15 years, but I could still hear her in the greenhouse, still feel the particular grip of her hand at the end. That last week, she was mostly asleep. But one afternoon, she was clear, clearer than she'd been in days, and she made me sit on the edge of the hospital bed. She wasn't worried about the farm. She knew I'd work. She was worried about the rest of them. Your father is a good man who got scared of being poor a long time ago, she said, and fear that old turns into something else. It turns into a way of seeing. He'll measure you by what you can show because that's the only ruler he trusts, and your sister learned it from him before she could walk. She squeezed my hand. Don't argue with the ruler, Emma. You'll never win. Just refuse to be measured by it. I was 19. I thought I understood. I didn't, not really. Not until I was 34, with a folder on my truck seat that could save the very people who'd measured me and found me wanting. My mother handed me 60 acres in one sentence, and it took me 15 years and a wedding toast to finally hear the sentence right. Don't argue with the ruler. Refuse to be measured by it. There is a difference, it turns out, between the two. And I had spent my whole adult life doing the first while telling myself I was doing the second. I pulled into the drive. The fields were black and quiet, and for the first time, I let myself ask the question I had been avoiding since Marcus Bell slid that folder across his desk. What was I going to do with this? That Sunday was the anniversary of my mother's death, and every year, whatever else is broken between us, my father hosts a dinner for it. I almost didn't go, but I wanted to see him before the meeting. Wanted to understand what I was walking into. So I put on a plain dress and drove in. The house was all polished surfaces and no warmth. Vanessa was there on her phone. Daniel and Chloe back from their honeymoon, quiet. And my father, thinner than at the wedding, with a gray cast to his skin I hadn't noticed under the ballroom lights. He was drinking more than usual. Halfway through dinner, loosened by wine and unable to help himself, he started talking about the company the way he does, as if we were shareholders. We're on the edge of something big, he announced. Biggest contract in the company's history. National distributor, premium line. It closes next week, and it puts Harrison Provisions back where it belongs. Vanessa shot him a look, the look that means don't air the laundry. But he waved it off. It's family. They should know we're gonna be fine. He didn't say we were drowning. He didn't have to. A man who announces he's about to be saved is a man who knows how close he came to going under. He raised his glass to Ruth, to the company, to the future. And he never once looked at me and thought to ask what I'd been up to lately. I sat at his table and listened to my father describe the deal that would save his life, with no idea that the supplier he was counting on, the one name the whole thing rested on, was sitting 3 feet away, eating his overcooked roast in silence. I said nothing. I had gotten very good at saying nothing, but I was starting to understand what my silence was worth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 2, made coffee, and spread the whole Bell & Crane contract across my kitchen table, all 40 pages, and I read it the way I read a field before planting, looking for what the surface didn't show. And there it was, cleaner than I'd let myself see in Marcus Bell's office. The entire deal was a chain, and a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And I was not the weak link. I was the link nobody could replace. Bell & Crane needed a certified organic supplier at volume in this corridor. And there was one, me. My father needed the distribution volume this contract would send through his plant, or his company folded. And that volume only existed if there was produce to distribute. And the only produce was mine. Marcus Bell had built the whole structure so that everyone signed at once in one room. And if the supplier walked, the whole thing collapsed, and my father's lifeline collapsed with it. I read it 3 times, sitting there in the dark with my hands wrapped around a cold mug. The whole thing came down to one name on the supplier line, and that name was mine. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I did not feel triumphant. I felt sick, actually, and then quiet, and then something steadier underneath, like ground firming up after rain. My father had stood in a ballroom and asked when a farmer would ever afford a wedding like his. And the answer the whole time was sitting in a farmhouse kitchen at 2 in the morning holding the single page that decided whether he kept his company at all. He had asked the wrong question. The right one was whether he could afford to keep insulting the only person who could save him. Vanessa called me on Tuesday. I almost didn't recognize the number because Vanessa does not call me. Texts occasionally, usually to coordinate a family obligation she wants me to handle. But this was a call, and her voice had the bright, brisk warmth she uses on people she needs something from. Emma, listen, I know you've got your little farm thing, but are you free Thursday and Friday? I said I might be. It's just we're doing a big cleanup at the plant, reorganizing the cold storage warehouse before a client walks through, and we're short bodies. I thought, well, you're used to physical work, hauling and lifting and all that, and honestly, you'd probably be faster than the temps. I could get you $20 an hour cash. She said it like she was doing me a favor. My sister, co-CEO of a company about to be saved by my signature, was offering me $20 an hour to stack boxes for the client walkthrough. And the client, though she didn't know it, was the same deal that ran through my fields. You want me to clean your warehouse? I said for the client walkthrough. It would mean a lot, she said. And you know, it would be nice to have you around. We never see you. Then softer, the knife wrapped in wool. You can wash the dirt off your hands, Emma, but you might as well put them to good use. She laughed like it was a joke. I didn't. I stood in my greenhouse with the phone to my ear and looked out at rows and rows of the produce her company was praying to distribute. And I understood that she genuinely could not conceive of me as anything but hired hands, not a rival, not a peer, certainly not the woman whose name was on the supplier line. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. And I thought about it very differently than she meant. I told Sophia about it the next morning over coffee in the farm office, both of us watching the crews load the day's harvest. She listened to the whole thing, the wedding toast, the folder, the warehouse offer. And when I finished, she set down her mug and said the thing I'd been afraid to say to myself, so don't sign. I looked at her. You heard me, she said. Emma, these people have spent your whole life stepping on you. Now the one deal that saves them happens to run through your gate, and you're agonizing about it. Let them sink. Bell will find another way, or he won't. But either way, your father's company folding is not your problem to solve. You don't owe them your name. And she wasn't wrong. That was the trouble. Everything she said was true and clean and fair. And part of me wanted it badly, wanted to sit in my farmhouse and let the tower crumble and feel nothing but the quiet. But I kept seeing things I didn't want to see. The 200 people my father employs, the line workers, the drivers, the woman at the front desk who's been there since I was a kid, they didn't toast at any wedding. They'd just lose their jobs. And under that, deeper, uglier, I saw the truth about myself. If I let them sink, I'd be measuring them exactly the way they measured me, deciding a person's fate by whether they deserved it in my eyes. I'd win the argument by becoming the ruler. My mother's voice again. Don't argue with the ruler. Don't become it either. I don't know yet, I told Sophia, But letting them drown so I can feel righteous, that's not refusing to be measured. That's just measuring back. Sophia studied me. You're a better person than me, she said. No, I said, I just had a better mother. I decided to go to the meeting. I still didn't know exactly what I'd do when I got there. Whether I'd sign, whether I'd walk, whether I'd say a word about who I was before Marcus Bell did it for me. But I knew I had to be in that room as myself, and let whatever happened happen in the open instead of in the dark where I'd been hiding my whole life. The night before, I did something I couldn't fully explain, even to myself. I went out to the cutting garden at dusk, and I cut flowers. Not the show orchids, not the wedding whites. The wildflowers my mother had planted along the north fence 30 years ago, and I'd never had the heart to plow under. Black-eyed Susans, coneflower, Queen Anne's lace, the scrappy, unfashionable blooms that grow where you don't fuss over them. I cut an armful and wrapped the stems and set them on the passenger seat of the truck next to the folder. I wasn't going to hand them to anyone. I wasn't going to make a speech about them. I just wanted something of my mother's in the room. Something that had come out of the ground and asked nobody's permission to be beautiful. Sophia found me doing it and raised an eyebrow. Flowers to a contract signing. Flowers to a contract signing, I said. She didn't ask why. She's known me long enough to know that some things I do with my hands before my head is caught up. I loaded the truck that night so I wouldn't have time to talk myself out of it in the morning. Folder, flowers, a clean shirt, my mother's ruler still ringing in my ears. Then I stood in the dark yard a while and looked at the fields, and I made myself a promise about what kind of person would walk into that room. Then I went to bed and didn't sleep. There was one thing I had to do first, and it was the thing that made everything else real. Marcus Bell's office had sent a logistics email that morning, confirming the signing meeting, listing attendees, asking each party to confirm their principal signatory. For 15 years, I had done business behind a curtain. The farm operated as an LLC, contracts went out under E. Harrison, and when a buyer wanted a face across the table, I sent Sophia, and I let people assume the owner was some man named Harrison, who preferred to stay off the road. The one place my full name lived in the open was the Organic Certification Registry, a federal database anyone could search. And that was how Bell's sourcing team had traced their way to Harrison Farms in the first place. A single line reading Emma Harrison among the certified growers. But a name in a database is not a face in a room, and every time a buyer wanted the face, they got Sophia. It had kept my two worlds apart. It had kept me safe. And now Bell and Crane wanted the principal signatory confirmed by name in writing for a meeting my father and my sister would be sitting in. I read the email 4 times. My cursor sat blinking in the reply box for a long time. If I typed my name, if I confirmed that Emma Harrison, owner of Harrison Farms, would personally attend, then the curtain came down for good. My father would see. My sister would see. Everyone in that glass tower would know exactly what the girl in the muddy boots had built while they weren't looking, and there would be no putting it back in the dark. I thought about my mother's door. She kept unlocked. I thought about 15 years of being invisible on purpose and calling it dignity, and I typed it. Emma Harrison, owner, Harrison Farms, will attend and sign on behalf of the supplier. I read it once more. Then I hit send, and I felt the click of it go out into the world. Irreversible. Like a gate swinging shut behind you on a road you can't walk back up. Whatever I had been protecting all these years, I had just given it up on purpose. There was no undoing it. And strangely, for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I told Sophia that afternoon that I'd be going in alone. She'd been my face for years, the one who sat across from the buyers, the buffer between me and every room where I didn't want to be seen. And she looked at me for a long moment, and understood before I finished the sentence. You don't want me there. It's not that, I said. It's that if you're there, I'll hide behind you. I always have. You walk in first, and I read the room from the back. And that's exactly the thing I'm done doing. She nodded slowly. There was something in her face I hadn't expected. Not hurt exactly, but the particular quiet of watching someone step off a ledge. You can't step off with them. You've never signed a big one without me in the room, she said. I know. You sure? No, I said. And we both almost laughed. But I'm doing it anyway. She squeezed my shoulder the way she does, and then she said the thing I needed. For what it's worth, boss, you built this. Not the LLC, not the paperwork. You with your hands. Whatever happens in that room, that part's already true, and nobody in it can vote on it. I drove home that night back to the dark farmhouse, and the truck felt very empty, with just me in the folder and the wildflowers wilting slightly on the seat. For years I'd had a shield, a system, a way of being present without being exposed. I'd just set all of it down. Tomorrow, I would walk into my father's world, with nothing between me and them but the truth. And the truth had never once protected me before. But I was 34, and my mother was 15 years gone. And I was finally done being invisible. Whatever it cost me, I was done. Daniel called me the night before the meeting. He didn't know about any of it. The contract, the folder, that I was the supplier his father was praying to. He just called because he'd been worried about me since the wedding, my sweet brother, and he wanted to hear my voice. We talked about the honeymoon, about Chloe, about nothing, and then he got quiet and said, "Dad's a mess right now, the company." I don't think he knows I know, but Chloe overheard him on the phone. He said if this deal next week falls through, they're done. Layoffs, the whole thing. He said there's some supplier holding all the cards and he can't even get a meeting with them until the signing, and it's driving him crazy. Some hard nose who won't take his calls. I closed my eyes in the dark of my kitchen. Some hard nose. I said, "Yeah, he's terrified of them," Daniel said. Honestly, first time I've ever heard Dad scared of anybody. I could have told him right then, but I kept my silence, knowing that the morning would bring the sunrise, and the truth would finally speak for itself.